As a wedding planner for 8 years, I thought I'd seen everything. Bridezillas, drunken best men, mother-in-laws who wore white to spite their daughters. But nothing prepared me for Delilah's consultation in March. She walked into my office looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Designer dress, perfect makeup, engagement ring that could blind someone. But her hands were shaking as she filled out the intake form. "I need the most secure venue you have," she said without any pleasantries. "Somewhere with gates, security cameras, the works." I'd planned celebrity weddings before, so I assumed it was about paparazzi. I started showing her photos of our gated estates and private resorts. She shook her head at everything. "Do any of them have safe rooms?" she asked. That stopped me cold. In 8 years, no bride had ever asked about safe rooms. "Can you tell me what you're concerned about?" I asked gently. Delilah's perfect composure cracked just slightly. She looked around my office like someone might be listening, then leaned forward. "My family doesn't know I'm getting married," she whispered. "And if they find out, they'll kill me, literally." I'd heard dramatic family feuds before, but something in her voice made my blood run cold. This wasn't hyperbole. "When you say literally, you mean they will murder me and my fiancé," she said matter-of-factly. "My brother already tried once when he found out I was dating Caspian. Shot at us through our apartment window. We've been in hiding for 6 months." I set down my pen. This was way beyond wedding planning territory. "Maybe you should consider postponing until things settle down." "There is no settling down." Delilah cut me off. "My family runs the CLO organization. You might have heard of them. I had. Everyone in this city had heard of the Kozlovs. They controlled half the underground gambling, most of the drug trade, and had a body count that made the evening news regularly. Caspian is from the Romano family," she continued. "Our families have been at war for 3 generations. 17 people have died because of this feud. My dad told me he'd rather see me dead than married to a Romano." My mouth went dry. Romeo and Juliet was a tragedy, not a wedding inspiration. "So you want to get married in secret?" I asked. "Not secret. Public, very public." Her eyes had a strange gleam. "I want the biggest, most elaborate wedding this city has ever seen. I want every news station there. You want it so public that they can't make us disappear quietly." I stared at her. It was either brilliant or insane. "The Romano family will pay for everything," she said, sliding a black card across my desk. "No budget limit, but it has to be perfect and it has to be in 6 weeks." 6 weeks is impossible for a large wedding? It's not impossible. It's just expensive. She looked at me steadily. "I know you planned the Grand Anthem wedding in 4 weeks when their daughter got pregnant. I know you have the connections." She'd done her homework. The Grand Anthem wedding had been a nightmare of expedited everything, but we'd pulled it off for the right price. "There's something else," Delilah said. "The moment we send out invitations, both families will know. They'll have 6 weeks to plan how to stop us. We need to make it impossible for them to succeed." I thought about the insurance liability alone and felt sick. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Plan a wedding that keeps us alive long enough to say I do," she said simply. "After that, we're on our own." 3 days later, I was standing in an abandoned warehouse with Caspian Romano, trying to figure out how to transform it into a fortress disguised as a wedding venue. He was handsome in that dangerous way that made smart women do stupid things, but his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. "The guest list is going to be interesting," he said, showing me his phone. "Half will be armed Kozlovs, half will be armed Romanos, plus legitimate guests who have no idea they're walking into a potential wear zone." That's when I realized what I'd gotten myself into wasn't just wedding planning. It was survival planning. Caspian explained their strategy while I tried not to hyperventilate. The warehouse sat on neutral ground, technically owned by Thessity, surrounded by businesses that closed at 6 p.m., multiple exit routes, loading docks that could handle emergency vehicles, and thick concrete walls that could stop bullets. "We'll need metal detectors," I said, making notes. "Won't work," Caspian replied. "Both families have legitimate guests who carry legally. Plus, people who want to smuggle weapons past detectors know how. Then how do we keep everyone safe?" "We don't," Delilah said, appearing beside us. "We just make sure the cost of starting a war is higher than the cost of letting us marry." The first week was a crash course in criminal family dynamics. Delilah explained how the feud started back in 1987 when her grandfather caught Caspian's grandfather skimming from their shared construction business. What should have been a civil lawsuit turned into 3 decades of bloodshed, when harsh words led to a fistfight, which led to a stabbing, which led to a shooting, which led to entire families choosing sides. My great-uncle Anatoly was the first to die, Delilah told me as we toured potential caterers shot in the back while leaving church. Caspian's family claimed it was self-defense, but Anatoly was unarmed. That's when my family decided the Romanos couldn't be trusted. The revenge killing happened 6 months later. Caspian's cousin was found floating in the harbor with his throat cut. Both families blamed the other. The police couldn't prove anything, but the message was clear. This was now a blood feud. 17 people over 30 years, Caspian said during one of our planning meetings. 17 funerals, 17 families destroyed, and for what? A construction contract that went bankrupt. Anyway, learning the family history was essential for understanding the seating chart complexities. Each death had created new enemies, new grievances, new reasons for violence. Delilah's cousin, Marina, couldn't sit near Caspian's uncle, Roberto, because Roberto had allegedly ordered the hit on Marina's brother. Caspian's aunt couldn't be in the same section as 3 different Koff women whose husbands Hadid and Romano ordered attacks. It's like planning a seating chart for 30 years of warfare. I told my assistant while we worked through the guest list. Everyone hates everyone else for specific documented reasons. The vendor meetings became exercises in criminal psychology. Each potential supplier needed to be vetted not just for quality and reliability, but for family connections and criminal associations. The wrong florist could be a Kozlov cousin looking for revenge. The wrong caterer might have Romano connections and poison the food. My usual cake baker, Margaret, had worked with me for 5 years. But when I ran her background check, I discovered her ex-husband was a low-level associate in the Petrov organization. That connection alone disqualified her. I've never even met Viktor Petrov, she protested when I explained the situation. My ex-husband just ran numbers for them occasionally. Occasionally is enough, I replied. The Kozlovs would see any Petrov connection as a threat. Finding replacement vendors who were completely clean took weeks. Most bakeries, florists, and caterers in the city had some connection to one criminal organization or another, either as customers, through family relationships, or via protection payments. I finally located a wedding cake specialist 3 cities away who'd 0 criminal connections. She charged double her normal rate plus hazard pay, but agreed to make the most elaborate 5-tier cake I'd ever commissioned. I've done celebrity weddings, she told me during our consultation, but I've never had to worry about the cake being used as cover for an assassination attempt. The dress shopping process revealed the depth of Delilah's isolation from her family. Traditional Russian weddings involve multiple generations of women helping select the gown, but Delilah's mother refused to participate. She told me I was dead to her the day I chose Caspian over family loyalty. Delilah explained as we browsed designer gowns, she won't even return my phone calls. Her grandmother, Babushka Yelena, became Heronly family support. At 87, she was the matriarch who'd immigrated from Russia in 1962 and watched her family build an empire through violence and fear. In old country, families fight over land, over politics, she told me in heavily accented English while Delilah tried on her 7th dress. Here, families fight over nothing. Pride, stupidity. Boys with guns think they are men. Babushka Yelena had lost 3 sons to the family business. 1 to rival gangs, 1 to police, 1 to prison where he died during a riot. She'd buried a husband who was shot outside a grocery store. She'd raised grandchildren who inherited hatred instead of love. Delilah is first to choose happiness over revenge, she said, touching the silk of the wedding dress. Maybe she breaks curse on this family. The Romano side had their own family drama. Caspian's parents hadn't spoken to him since learning about the engagement. His mother called me directly to plead for cancellation. "You don't understand what you're facilitating," she said during a tearful phone call. "This isn't Romeo and Juliet. This is suicide. My son will be dead within a year. Why don't you support him if you're that worried?" I asked. Because supporting him means betraying everything his father stands for. My husband has spent 40 years building respect through fear. If he appears weak by accepting this marriage, rivals will see it as opportunity to move against us. The complexity of criminal family politics made normal wedding drama seem refreshingly simple. Every decision had implications beyond personal preference. The color scheme couldn't favor one family over another. The menu needed to include both Russian and Italian dishes without suggesting preference. Even the music selection required diplomatic consideration. 3 weeks into planning, I discovered the full scope of what we were dealing with. Caspian provided me with detailed intelligence reports his family had compiled on the Koff organization. Similarly, Delilah shared her family's surveillance information on the Romanos. Reading those files was like studying military dossiers. Each family member had detailed profiles including criminal history, known associates, weapons preferences, and psychological assessments. Both families had been preparing for final confrontation for years. My uncle Dmitri has been buying explosives for 6 months, Delilah revealed during one planning session. He's convinced the Romanos are planning to bomb our legitimate businesses. My cousin Luca installed armor plating in his car and hired ex-military bodyguards. Caspian encountered. He thinks the Kozlovs are planning coordinated assassinations. Both families were armed, paranoid, and convinced the other side was planning imminent attack. Our wedding was happening at the exact moment when 30 years of tension was reaching critical mass. The threat level escalated daily. Someone firebombed a Romano-owned restaurant, causing $200,000 in damage. The Kosevs retaliated by vandalizing 3 Romano businesses in one night. Police increased patrols in neighborhoods controlled by both families. Maybe we should consider relocating the wedding, I suggested after the restaurant bombing. Las Vegas, Perhaps somewhere neutral? No, both Delilah and Caspian said simultaneously. Running away won't solve anything, Delilah explained. Our families will just follow us wherever we go. We need to face this here now publicly. Plus, Caspian added grimly, if we're going touty, at least we'll die in our hometown where people can witness what happened. Their acceptance of potential death was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Security planning became a military operation. Torres, our head of security, was a former Navy SEAL who'd done executive protection for foreign diplomats in war zones. Even he seemed nervous about this assignment. I've protected people in Baghdad and Kabul, he told me during one briefing. But at least there, I knew who the enemies were here. Everyone's potentially dangerous. We developed protocols for every conceivable scenario. If shooting started during the ceremony, the wedding party would drop behind the altar while security engaged threats. If bombs were detected, evacuation would happen through predetermined routes. If law enforcement intervened, specific team members would handle media management. What if both families start shooting at each other? I asked. We hit the floor and pray, Torres replied. At that point, it becomes urban warfare. The FBI's involvement added another layer of complexity. Agent Morrison began attending our planning meetings, though her colleagues remained undercover. She explained how federal agents would be integrated into our security without compromising their investigation. We've been trying to penetrate both organizations for years, she told me. This wedding gives us unprecedented access to leadership from both families in one location. What happens if you arrest them during the ceremony? I asked. We won't, she assured me. Federal agents will gather intelligence and evidence, but arrests will happen later. We don't want to turn your wedding into a crime scene. The reassurance didn't make me feel much better. Media management became another full-time job. Delilah wanted maximum publicity to make violence politically costly, but that meant managing reporters who sensed a major story. 3 television stations requested exclusive coverage rights. 2 newspapers wanted embedded journalists. A true crime podcaster offered 6 figures for recording rights. We need media present but controlled, Caspian explained. Too much coverage and we look like circus performers. Too little and we lose the protection that publicity provides. We settled on pool coverage. 3 photographers, 2 video crews, and 1 print journalist who would share content with other outlets. Everyone signed agreements limiting coverage to the eye. Ceremony itself, not pre-wedding preparation or family meetings. The invitations alone required 3 weeks to coordinate. Each had to be hand-delivered to avoid interception. The wording needed diplomatic precision to avoid giving offense. The RSVP process included background checks on +1s and verification of family relationships. Half the people receiving invitations want to kill the other half, I explained to the invitation designer. Please make sure the calligraphy is absolutely perfect. 2 weeks before the wedding, the first major security breach occurred. Someone broke into my office overnight and photographed all our planning documents. Nothing was stolen, but every detail of our security arrangements had been compromised. Both families now know exactly how we're protecting the event. Torres told Meg grimly, we have to assume they'll plan accordingly. We spent 3 days completely revising our security protocols, changing vendors, and relocating backup plans. The cost overruns were astronomical, but Caspian's family paid without complaint. Money is irrelevant, his uncle Lorenzo told me when I explained the additional expenses. This wedding determines whether our families destroy each other or find peace. Whatever it costs is worth paying. 10 days before the ceremony, we faced our biggest crisis yet. The venue owner received a formal notice from the city condemning the warehouse due to structural safety concerns. An anonymous complaint had triggered an inspection that found violations we knew were bogus. Someone with political connections is trying to shut us down, Torres concluded after reviewing the inspection report. These violations are fabricated. We had 400 confirmed guests, vendors scheduled to arrive in a week, and nowhere to hold the ceremony. Relocating an event this complex seemed impossible with such short notice. That's when the Romano family's political influence proved valuable. Within 24 hours, they'd arranged Air Placement Venue, a nightclub owned by Lorenzo that had been closed for innovations. It wasn't ideal, but it was available and secure. The space is smaller, Lorenzo explained during our emergency meeting. Capacity is limited to 300 instead of 400, but it has reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, and a secure perimeter. Reducing the guest list by 100 people created diplomatic nightmares. Which family members could be disinvited without causing offense? Which friends would understand the circumstances? How do you tell a federal judge that your wedding venue changed and there's no longer room for them? My assistant spent 3 days making apologetic phone calls while I coordinated with vendors to reconfigure everything for the smaller space. The florist needed to redesign aisle arrangements. The caterer had to adjust menu quantities. The photographer required new lighting plans. This is like planning 2 completely different weddings, my assistant said after working 18 hours straight to coordinate the changes. If we survive this weekend, I'm taking a vacation. 5 days before the ceremony, both families received devastating news. Federal prosecutors had unsealed indictments against 17 people from both organizations, including 2 family patriarchs. The charges ranged from racketeering to money laundering to murder conspiracy. The FBI is moving faster than expected, Agent Morrison told me during an emergency briefing. Someone leaked information about the wedding investigation. Will you arrest people at the ceremony? I asked. No, the indictments won't be executed until after the wedding, but both families know they're coming. This changed everything. Instead of just attending outing, both families were now facing their final moments of freedom. The ceremony had become a last gathering before their world collapsed. They'll be even more dangerous now, Torres warned. Desperate people do desperate things. The final week was controlled chaos punctuated by moments of genuine terror. Vendors arrived early to set up while family members conducted what looked like final meetings. Federal agents maintained surveillance while trying to stay invisible. Security teams ran constant threat assessments while legitimate guests remained oblivious to the danger. Delilah spent her final night of bachelorhood in a safe house, surrounded by bodyguards and FBI agents. She looked beautiful, but exhausted when I visited for final dress fitting. Do you think we're crazy? She asked while adjusting her veil. Completely, I replied honestly. But sometimes crazy is the only rational response to impossible situations. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, perfect weather for either a wedding or a funeral. I arrived at the venue at 5:00 a.m. to oversee final preparations and found Torres already there, coordinating with 3 different security teams. Federal agents are in position, he reported. Family security is arriving. Local police have established perimeter. Media is setting up outside. Any threats overnight? 2 false alarms. Someone called in a bomb threat, but it was traced to a drunk teenager. A car backfired in the Romano neighborhood and triggered a manhunt. The morning passed intense preparation. Vendors completed setup, while security swept the venue repeatedly. Family members arrived dearly, each group claiming different sections of the club and eyeing the others suspiciously. At noon, Delilah and her wedding party arrived via armored limousine. She looked radiant despite everything, or perhaps because of it. Sometimes people shine brightest when facing their greatest challenges. Caspian had spent the night in a different safe house and arrived separately with his groomsmen. When he saw Delilah, his face lit up with such genuine joy that I momentarily forgot we were planning a wedding that might become a battlefield. The guest list had indeed become a criminal convention. Federal surveillance counted license plates associated with 5 different organized crime families, 3 federal judges, 2 state senators, 4 police chiefs, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. This is either the most well-protected wedding in history or the most dangerous, Agent Morrison observed, watching the final guests arrive. At 3 p.m., the ceremony began. 100 people sat in careful segregation. Kozlovs on the left, Romanos on the right, federal agents scattered throughout, legitimate guests in the middle serving as human shields. The processional music began, and Delilah walked down the aisle past 3 decades of accumulated hatred. Her father wasn't there to give her away. He'd refused to attend. Instead, Babushka Yelena escorted her, the 87-year-old matriarch moving slowly but steadily. The minister, Reverend Patrick, was a retired military chaplain who'd volunteered for the assignment after 3 other clergy declined. He officiated ceremonies in combat zones and seemed genuinely calm despite the circumstances. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the tense room, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join Delilah and Caspian in holy matrimony. When asked if anyone objected to the marriage, the silence stretched endlessly. I held my breath, waiting for someone to speak, for shots to ring out, for the careful peace to shatter. But the silence held. Do you, Caspian Romano, take the Laya cloth to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Caspian said clearly, his voice steady despite everything. Do you, Delilah Kozlov, take Caspian Romanoto be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, she replied, tears streaming down her face, but her voice strong. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. As they kissed, the room erupted in applause. Some genuine joy from friends, some polite acknowledgement from family, all relief that we'd made it through the ceremony without bloodshed. The reception began with careful diplomacy. Both families remained seated at opposite sides of the room, but the atmosphere was less hostile than expected. Perhaps the ceremony's solemnity had reminded everyone of higher purposes than revenge. The first toast came from Babushka Yelena, who stood slowly and raised her glass of vodka. In Russia, we have saying shebegan in heavily accented English. What is stronger, lion or bear? Answer is love is stronger than both. Today, love wins. The room drank to that sentiment, even family members who disapproved of the marriage. Caspian's uncle Lorenzo offered the next toast, choosing his words carefully to honor tradition without acknowledging the criminal aspects of their conflict. To family, he said simply, "May the next generation know more peace than the last." The real surprise came when Viktor Petrov stood to speak. As head of the third criminal family present, his words carried significant weight. "I have watched two families destroy themselves for 30 years over pride and old grudges," he said, looking directly at both patriarchs' representatives. "Tonight, two young people show us another way. Perhaps it is time for all of us to choose love over hatred." His toast seemed to shift the room's energy. Conversations began between family members who hadn't spoken civilly in years. Children from both families played together while their parents maintained careful but peaceful distance. The dinner service proceeded without incident, though I noticed security personnel remained alert throughout. Federal agents circulated with recording equipment while maintaining their catering disguises. The photographer captured moments that would later serve as evidence in federal trials. Around 9:00 p.m., as the evening wound toward its conclusion, the inevitable happened. Someone, we never determined who, made a comment that triggered an argument between two family members. Within seconds, both families were on their feet, shouting in multiple languages while reaching for concealed weapons. The lights went out immediately as Torres activated emergency protocols. Emergency lighting bathed the room in red illumination while security moved to separate potential combatants. FBI agents dropped their covers and activated communication devices. In the darkness, I heard the distinctive sound of weapons being drawn, safety catches being released, and people diving for cover. Women screamed, children cried, glass shattered as someone attempted to escape through the club's reinforced windows. 3 shots rang out. Not many, but enough to send the room into complete panic. When the main lights returned 30 seconds later, the scene was chaos, but not carnage. Overturned tables, scattered chairs, broken glass, and one man bleeding from a shoulder wound where he'd been grazed by a bullet. But nobody was dead. Torres and his team had performed perfectly, using darkness and confusion to disarm potential combatants before anyone could fire effectively. The FBI agents had maintained their positions while gathering evidence. The shots had been warning shots fired into the ceiling, not attempts at murder. Everyone remained calm, Agent Morrison announced, dropping her catering disguise and displaying her federal badge. "FBI, nobody moves until we sort this out." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Both families demanded lawyers while federal agents began making arrests based on outstanding warrants and weapons violations discovered during the brief conflict. As handcuffs clicked on various family members, the newlyweds stood in the center of the destroyed reception venue, still in their wedding clothes, holding hands while their world transformed around them. "Did we really do it?" Delilah asked, surveying the wreckage. "We're alive and married," Caspian replied. "That's what matters." The aftermath extended far beyond that chaotic evening. FBI raids conducted over the following weeks dismantled both criminal organizations completely. Asset forfeiture seized properties worth millions. Criminal prosecutions resulted in 47 federal convictions and prison sentences totaling more than 300 years, but the violence ended permanently. Without leadership and infrastructure, remaining family members lacked their sources to continue their feud. Younger relatives used the opportunity to pursue legitimate careers. Older members were too busy with legal defense to plan revenge. The Petro organization, having remained neutral during the wedding confrontation, actually benefited from their rivals' destruction. Viktor Petrov consolidated control over territories previously contested between the Kozlovs and Romanos, though federal pressure eventually forced him to legitimize his operations as well. Delilah and Caspian spent 6 months in federal protective custody while testifying against family members who'd attempted to involve them in criminal activities. Their testimony was crucial in securing convictions against several high-ranking family members. When they were finally released from protection, they relocated to a small town in Oregon, where they opened an Italian-Russian fusion restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Their marriage had literally ended a war and led to legitimate business collaboration between their cultures. The restaurant became moderately famous after food critics discovered the unusual story behind its creation. Travel magazines wrote articles about the peace cuisine served by former crime family members. The Food Network produced a documentary about cooking traditions that survived family violence, but mostly they just lived quietly and happily. My role in the FBI investigation remained classified for 2 years until Agent Morrison received permission to discuss the operation publicly. By then, I'd become known in law enforcement circles as the wedding planner who'd helped bring down organized crime. The reputation was both blessing and curse. Celebrity clients appreciated my ability to handle complex security situations and maintain discretion, but I also attracted attention from criminal organizations who viewed me as a potential threat. I hired permanent security and moved my office to a building with better protection. My assistant quit after receiving death threats and now works for an accounting firm in another state. I don't blame her. She never signed up for federal investigations and criminal prosecutions. But business flourished in unexpected ways. Wealthy families with complex dynamics sought my services specifically because I'd proven capable of managing extreme situations. Politicians wanted someone who understood security. Protocols.celebrities appreciated my experience with media management under pressure. 3 years later, I received a card announcing the birth of Delilah and Caspian's first child, a daughter they named Hope. The symbolism was obvious but meaningful. She'll grow up in a world without family feuds. Delilah had written, "That's the best wedding gift we could have given her." The card included a photo of their restaurant's opening day, showing both sets of grandparents, those not in federal prison, helping serve customers, former enemies working together to build something positive for their grandchild's future. 5 years after the wedding, I received another update. Caspian had been elected to the city council in their small Oregon town. Delilah was teaching art therapy to at-risk youth. Their daughter was learning to speak 3 languages, English, Russian, and Italian, from grandparents who'd once tried to kill each other. The transformation seemed miraculous until I considered what had actually happened. 2 young people had chosen love over inherited hatred. They'd risked everything to break cycles of violence that had consumed their families for decades. And they had succeeded not through more violence, but through the radical act of public commitment to peace. Other criminal families took notice. The wedding became legend in organized crime circles, not a cautionary tale, but as proof that different choices were possible. Several other family feuds ended through negotiated settlements rather than bloodshed. Law enforcement agencies began studying our wedding as a model for using public events to gather intelligence on criminal organizations. Agent Morrison developed training protocols based on the operation's success. The key was creating a situation where subjects felt safe enough to attend, but exposed enough to be monitored. She explained during a law enforcement conference. The wedding provided perfect cover for comprehensive surveillance. But for me, the most important outcome was simpler. 2 people who loved each other, got married, and lived happily ever after, despite everything trying to keep them apart. 7 years later, I still keep those postcards from Delilah and Caspian framed in my office. When brides complain about minor family drama or stress over centerpiece colors, I point to those pictures and tell abbreviated versions of the story. Every wedding faced obstacles, I explain. The question is whether you love each other enough to overcome them. Most couples find their problems more manageable after hearing about planning a ceremony under FBI surveillance, while crime families pointed guns at each other. But the deeper lesson is about the power of love to transform hatred. Delilah and Caspian didn't just get married, they ended aware. Their wedding became the catalyst for their families to choose peace over violence, cooperation over conflict. Sometimes I wonder if I peaked too early in my career. How do you follow up planning an event that brought down 3 criminal organizations and ended a multi-generational blood feud? Then I remember that every wedding at its core represents the same fundamental choice. 2 people deciding that love is stronger than whatever forces try to keep them apart. Whether those forces are disapproving parents, financial problems, cultural differences, or armed crime families. The obstacles change, but the choice remains constant. Love or fear, peace or conflict, hope or despair. Delilah and Caspian chose love, and it changed everything. That's what real weddings are about. Not perfect flowers or flawless photographs, but imperfect people making perfect promises to face the future together. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, those promises become powerful enough to change the world. 10 years later, I received one final update from Oregon. Delilah and Caspian now owned 3 restaurants and employed several dozen people from both sides of their families. Their daughter, Hope, was thriving in school and planning to study international relations, inspired by her parents' example of resolving conflict through communication rather than violence. Most remarkably, the annual family reunion now included members from both the former COF and Roman organizations, along with their children and grandchildren. What had once been sworn enemies were now extended family, united by shared commitment to their children's peaceful future. The last line of Delilah's letter stayed with me. Some people inherit hatred. Others choose to inherit hope. That choice between inheriting hatred or choosing hope defines not just successful marriages, but successful lives. I've planned hundreds of weddings since then, each with their own challenges and complexities. But none has matched the stakes or impact of that April ceremony when 2 young people chose love overwear and changed the course of multiple families forever. Sometimes love really can conquer all. You just have to be brave enough to let it try.